paper turkeys sway, the Jenga tower tips, and somewhere outside, a tent zipper screams. The lights flicker, a shadow lifts a hatchet and whispers, "Happy Thanksgiving." The door locks behind you, and on the floor, that's not cranberry sauce.
What's that? You want to be scared? Come with me. You will experience tales of horror, ghosts, and death. It is not recommended for the weak at heart. Listen in the dark. It's more fun that way. This is Weekly Spooky.
Hello, my spookies. It's Wednesday, and you know what that means. It's time for a little spooky in your weekly. I'm your host and narrator, Enrique Couto. Tomorrow is Thanksgiving, and I hope all you spookies are going to have a very fun and safe holiday. If you happen to be traveling or preparing large meals, well, I have a twisted tale that you won't want to eat during, but will help uneventful tasks become twisted and scary. And now I'm here to announce officially that every day until Christmas, there will be a show to listen to right here on Weekly Spooky, about a dozen scary stories and novellas, as well as our This Week in Horror History, our Terrifying and True, which will all be Christmas-themed folklore and true terror, and of course some cutting deep into horror episodes, all about Christmas favorites you may have missed out on. So make sure you're subscribed right here for your source for Christmas horror. And I do want to mention this episode is sponsored by Savorista Coffee. Delicious, high-quality, bold-flavored coffee in half-calf or decaf for those who want their shivers to strictly come from a scary story and not from caffeine. Head to Savorista.com and use promo code SPOOKY at checkout to save 25% on your order. And when you do, it supports the show directly. That's Savorista.com, promo code SPOOKY. Thank you guys for giving Savorista a chance, and thank you, Savorista, for supporting the show. Now, as for tonight, imagine a locked-up ward trying to look cheerful. Paper turkeys taped to cinder block walls, a TV mumbling a holiday movie, and a Jenga game waiting for steady hands. Now imagine the night shift goes quiet. The rec room door clicks shut from the outside. What if the only thing left behind was a neat little pile of 7 hard, rattling souvenirs? Tonight, follow the fresh footprints through the snow to the records office and be thankful if you're good at tabletop games. Seven Teeth by David O'Hanlon. Richard DePaul had been a patient at the Metropolitan Psychiatric Hospital for 33 years. Only Melvin Watts had been there longer. Richard didn't like Melvin. He won every game they played and was actually Looney Tunes crazy. Not like Richard. His situation had just been a big misunderstanding. 15-year-old Richard had told his parents the new house was bad, but they hadn't listened. He didn't want to move to Nantucket in the first place, and they thought he was acting out. Once those horrible, wriggling things in the soil had crawled into the brains of his family, Richard had tried to get help. He'd told everyone about the evil worms that lived in his backyard. No one believed him, however. In fact, They tried to lock him up for even talking about it. The worms had gotten to them too, Richard figured. With the town under parasitic control, Richard had to rid his parents and 4 siblings of the parasites himself. He'd taken as much care as he could when he'd cracked their skulls open with a splitting maul. Apparently, he still hadn't been careful enough. Oh well, he'd saved them from the worms, and that was what mattered. Apparently, he'd even gotten the queen or master or whatever bizarre monarch they followed, because the rest of the town returned to normal soon after. No one remembered being under the control of the worms, unfortunately. He had saved Nantucket, and possibly the entire world. There was no sense crying over spilled brain matter. Besides, the asylum had its perks. Richard had volunteered for a study on the psychiatric benefits of psilocybin mushrooms for starters. He also got to spend most of his day outside. They let him keep a cat in his room. There was always orange jello at lunch. And they had a fuck tent. The tent started out as just blankets and broom handles, and had been something of a game between the staff and the patients. The orderlies would find it and tear it down, only for someone to set up a new one, somewhere else on the grounds. After a small outbreak of chlamydia, Dr. Chambers decided to start handing out birth control and condoms with the daily medications. Since it was obvious the tent was going to remain a permanent fixture of the hospital, the doctors had even given them a proper one to protect against the elements. It had been a big boost to morale, and the therapy sessions had become more and more productive as a result. Even though Richard had never personally been invited to the tent, he still visited it regularly. Sitting in the gently falling, half-frozen rain, he giggled at the way his erection pitched up the front of his poncho. It was too cold to keep the front of the tent open, but the electric lantern cast the whole scene on the nylon, like pornographic shadow puppets. Richard found that somehow more scandalous than his normal voyeurism. He tugged his thermals down enough to free the throbbing organ, and gripped it with his mittened hand. From the voluminous silhouette riding cowgirl, Richard was certain it was Big Jenny inside. The plummeting temperatures weren't going to be an issue. He'd caught several of her performances in the tent, and hadn't lasted more than 3 minutes, even once. Big Jenny had unnatural athleticism for her size. She was grinding some lucky son of a bitch straight into the earth, while whooping like Annie Oakley. Her shadow leaned forward, letting her gargantuan breasts smother whoever was underneath her. Richard heard a muffled voice shouting between the meaty boulders. He couldn't make out the words, but whatever the man was saying was working for Jenny. Richard's stroking quickened to match the pace of Jenny's ass, slamming down on her partner. Thunderclaps of flesh punctuated the sounds of drizzling sleet. Jenny sat upright, arching her back and cutting loose an orgasmic howl. Her erect nipples cast long shadows across the tent, and that was all it took. Richard wrestled with his poncho to get it clear of his expulsions. He convulsed and then collapsed against the tree trunk, still weakly pumping at himself. He watched as Jenny dismounted and moved onto all fours. The show wasn't over. Richard cursed under his breath. He'd never made it to the end of one of Big Jenny's performances. It wasn't a stamina issue. He'd once whacked it for over 3 hours straight watching Nurse Horn, after all. He eyed the curves of Jenny's body and twisted the slick, soiled mitten around his deflating member. Big Jenny was one hell of a woman. She'd left a pair of her panties in the tent once. Richard had squirreled them away under his pillow. Some nights he didn't even bother going to the tent to see a show, and just stayed in his room with the underwear tied over his nose and mouth. The icy pellets stung on his bare flesh, but he wanted to watch just a little longer. Maybe she'd leave behind a fresh pair of muff covers for him. Jenny's face went down to the floor. "What are you waiting for?" she purred like an old alley cat. Richard watched Jenny's lover rise to his knees behind her. Then he saw a new silhouette and stared at it stupidly. He'd peeped on a lot of people in the tent and seen a lot of strange things, including an assortment of industrious, homemade sex toys, but he'd never seen anything like that shadow, except once. He'd see the exact same thing cast on the living room wall when he'd seen a similar tool to. "Jenny!" he shouted, but it was too late. The hatchet came down and fluid sprayed across the nylon. The man swung again and again. Richard scrambled to his feet, struggling with his thermals as he ran for the main building. The cracks of breaking bones melded with the racket of the sleet now coming down in sheets. Richard fell up the front steps. The long johns wriggled down his legs, and he tried to kick them off, which only tangled them around his ankles. Richard screamed for help. He pressed himself up to his knees when the front door opened suddenly. "What the hell is going on out there?" Johnny Washington asked. Richard waddled to the orderly on his knees and grabbed the man's shirt, climbing up it like a house cat until he was standing and squeezing Johnny's face between his mittens. You have to help." Okay, calm down, Richie." Johnny pushed Richard to arm's length and held him by the elbows. "I need you to be cool and—" "Why are your pants down, Richie?" "We have to get the guards. We have to go out to the fuck tent." The fuck tent. Johnny was suddenly all too aware of the moist, sticky sensation on his cheek. He rubbed at it with obvious revulsion. "Dude, is this fucking jizz?" "It's the brainworms, Johnny. They're here." Richard shoved Johnny out of the way and shuffled into the building. "They murdered Big Jenny! The brainworms! They made them chop her up!" That was the last thing he said before he felt the needle stick. The Thorazine worked fast, and he was asleep before he could feel his nose breaking on the cold linoleum. "I think we can forego any further investigation," Dr. Chambers said solemnly. "Richard had a relapse. He was having such a good run of things, too." "A relapse?" Johnny repeated. "I don't think that's what happened, sir. I mean, I've known Richard, since I started working here. 14 years, and he ain't never been violent or aggressive with nobody. He's the one that came for help." "With his pants down," Chambers sighed and leaned back in his oversized desk chair. "Mr. Washington, you said it yourself. He admitted to being at the fornication tent, and he was ranting about brainworms. You were made privy to Richard's case history when you started, were you not?" Johnny hesitated, then gave a tentative nod. "I was, but that was over 30 years ago, sir. You should have seen him, Dr. Chambers. He was scared shitless." The doctor scowled at him. "Your colorful diagnosis of Richard's mental state notwithstanding, There are other considerations, Mr. Washington. When we searched Richard's room, we discovered a rather personal item of Jennifer's under his mattress. What kind of personal item? Johnny asked. Are you sure it's hers? Dr. Chambers removed a plastic evidence bag from a cardboard filing box. He shook out the contents and held the panties up with both of his hands. There aren't any initials in them, but I think it's a safe assumption that they belonged to Jennifer. Yeah, all right, those are definitely Big Jenny's drawers. Johnny slumped in his seat. Don't worry, Richard, Chambers reassured him. We won't be involving the police. Johnny snapped forward on the edge of his seat. You can't just not tell the cops. Of course I can. Chambers dropped the evidence back into the box. If I contacted them, they would come to the same conclusion I have. Richard is essentially serving a life sentence for the murders of his family. There is nothing that can be added to that. And what about Big Jenny? We will provide her with a proper funeral and notify any relatives of her tragic passing. They will be saddened but understanding given her weight and history of drug abuse. Chambers gauged Johnny's body language and sighed. Honestly, Mr. Washington, would you prefer the truth if you were in their shoes, knowing that she was brutally hacked up and suffered excruciating pain at the hands of a murderer who can never be punished? Or would you like to hear that she passed, peaceably, in her sleep? Man, this is... Johnny rested his head in his hands. We can't just sweep it under the rug. I understand your concerns. Chambers laced his fingers together over his chest. If you would like me to proceed according to procedure, I will begrudgingly comply. There will be a formal investigation, of course. That means a thorough look into our culpability. I'm sure you're aware of Senator Boulder's recent investigations into the state's mental health services. Any opportunity to hold someone on the staff accountable would greatly strengthen the senator's allegations. Richard cannot be punished for Miss Howard's death, but the orderly on duty, a few 100 yards from her murder, could be. You mother! Johnny snapped up with his fists clenched. He slowly let them relax and kicked the desk. Guess that wraps this up then. Like a perfect little present. Fitting, given the season. Chambers turned in his chair to stare out the iced-over window. Speaking of which, tomorrow is Thanksgiving. Will you be attending the staff dinner? Guess that depends whether the orderly that was on duty 100 yards from a murder still has a job. He wouldn't, Chambers stated bluntly. The orderly that was on duty during a tragic heart attack would, however. Guess I'll see you there, Doc, Johnny said with a smirk. It was a small victory, but he knew the doctor's disdain for the diminutive title. Johnny walked to the door and opened it. That served as enough of an invitation for Grant Lister, the head of the hospital's minuscule security team. The guard shouldered past him with a half-assed apology. With his horseshoe of graying hair and thick unibrow, Grant reminded Johnny of Sam Eagle from the Muppets. Johnny scoffed at the man and walked out. We took care of the tent, sir, Grant said as soon as the door closed. The crazies aren't going to be happy. Get the word out that it was on account of the weather. We'll get them one better suited for the cold. Surely one of your malfeasants is competent enough to purchase a tent. Maybe I should send a couple of them just to be sure. You know, lots of the nuts are going to be cracked up about Big Jenny. Grant snickered at his cleverness. Do you have a point? Chambers asked. Maybe we can name the new tent after her or something. What do you think? That might boost their morale. Perhaps we should leave the mental health concerns of our patients to the professionals, Chambers said. Where are we on the Ann Davis situation? Same place we were when the senator brought it up 3 months ago, sir. Grant blew dramatically across his palm. She vanished into thin air. I had a discharge form worked up and buried it in a random box in the basement. We can say it was a simple clerical error on our part. Destroy it. Chambers spun his chair around. Boulder wants to prove that we are incompetent. You want to show him we can't even file paperwork? Sorry, sir. It was the best I could come up with. Boulder won't be able to gather his lynch mob until after New Year's, Chambers told him. You will have a better plan before then. 10-4, boss. The rec room used to be calm and docile until Nurse Horn introduced the residents to Milton Bradley's newest game, Jenga. It had been an instant hit, and Chambers had purchased a dozen more sets to keep everyone occupied. Ed Hankey, a compulsive gambler, had organized a high-stakes tournament that ran every week. The hospital had a small movie theater, and the winner got to pick a double feature for that Saturday. Aside from the official prize, the players ran side bets for medication, smokes, snacks, and whatever else they could think to throw into the pot. Jesus Christ, Shell, Carter Copeland groaned. He used a discarded block to push the dentures back to the elderly nymphomaniac. You are not betting your dentures. Of course not. I need them to chew. Think of them more like a poker chip. You win and you can cash them in later. She gave him a wink behind the oversized lens of her bifocals. I'll gum that hog till you're squealing all the way home, youngster. Tempting, but maybe you could just put a couple reds on the line. Carter gestured to the secobarbital Shelley had won in her last match. Ed, serving as referee, laughed. Shit, if the new guy doesn't want the blowjob, I'll take it. Can't have it, Shelley told him. You don't have a snowball's chance in hell of beating me in this game, Ed. Carter tossed 2 cools into the pot. Fine, I'll see the Hummer and raise you. Now we got ourselves a real game. Shelley stood up and leaned over the tower to pick her next move. She made a show of the process, letting everyone around the table get a good look down her gown. Carter was on a 90-day hold for evaluation after he walked into a donut shop and started a fight with 7 cops inside. Not nearly long enough for those saggy, spotted pendulums to look appealing. Shelley paused and prodded a block, then looked at Carter. She pushed her tongue rhythmically against the inside of her jaw and pulled the block, sending the tower crashing across the table. The crowd booed, and Shelley feigned surprise. Sometimes you gotta lose to win, she cooed. Don't take too long coming to collect, Carter. I like to be in bed by 7. Shelley sauntered away, swaying her twice-replaced hips as well as she could, before joining a circle near the rec room's bay window that was working on more Thanksgiving decorations. There were already too many for Carter's taste, but everyone had been working diligently to make more ahead of the big turkey dinner the next day. He collected his winnings, minus the dentures, and stood to leave. He checked the bracket on the easel to see who his next opponent would be. "Looks like I got time for a walk before my next match," he said. "Send someone to get me when it's time. I'll be at the fountain." "The fountain?" Ed repeated. "It's barely even 40 degrees out there." "Exactly. It'll lower my heart rate so I can focus," he lied. "I'll see you in an hour." "Don't forget your winnings." Ed hurriedly picked up the false teeth. "Shelley gives the best head in the wing." "She's not exactly my type," Carter said. "She will be," Ed laughed. "Maybe I'm saving myself for Nurse Horn." "You better make some more friends," Ed informed him. "Nurse Horny only goes for group action." "Say, you think that means Multiple Mark has a chance? He's got like 19 personalities, so that's basically a gangbang, right?" "That's what your mother told me." Carter dry swallowed a pair of muscle relaxers he'd won. "You got way too much free time, Eddie." "Gonna have a lot more since Jenny got killed," Ed said somberly. "Killed?" Carter raised an eyebrow. "I thought Chambers said it was a heart attack." "He did. But I saw the tent when General Grant and his dingleberries dragged it to the incinerator. Blood dripped out all over the damn floor." Ed propped a foot onto the table, showing the soles of his slip-resistant sock. "I stepped in some before they could clean it up. You don't bleed out from a heart attack." "You sure don't." Carter pocketed the dentures. "The loony bin just got crazier." Carter sat down on the edge of the fountain and puffed a cigarette to life. The menthol seemed stronger in the frigid air. He watched the few meandering residents on the lawn. Dr. Chambers said it was part of the therapy to let the patients wander the grounds freely. But really, it was just because the hospital was an unmanageable mess. They were housing 300 patients in 180 rooms, while only 6 guards, sharing 2 high school diplomas, were responsible for the security of the entire compound. The buildings were a century old, and trustees handled any repair. They also took care of the cooking, cleaning, and landscaping to free up funds for more nurses and orderlies, who were mostly there to steal medications. Chambers had the only computer, and record-keeping was done by a patient volunteer on a typewriter with a missing K. It was no wonder they'd misplaced 17 patients in 2 years. Most had simply wandered off, but Ann Davis still couldn't be accounted for. Carter pulled the loose brick from its housing and peeled away the plastic bag taped to its inside edge. He slipped out the note inside and read it twice, committing the information to memory before dropping it into the fountain behind him. The note shriveled instantly, balling in on itself before breaking down into a white mist that drifted away completely. Carter slipped his own note into the bag. He replaced the brick with his findings nestled safely on its backside. Carter enjoyed his cigarette while digesting what he'd just read. His psych evaluation being conducted at the Metropolitan was no coincidence. Carter was hyperthymic. He needed almost no sleep and could work endlessly. No matter how bad things got, he was always a beacon of positivity. His brain was tuned for high-speed, high-stress situations. Fear and anxiety were foreign concepts. That all sounds well and good, until there's nothing to do. That's when Carter would get himself into trouble. He'd been in and out of juvie as a youth, and a judge thought a stint in the military might fix things. It had, too, up until the conflict in Vietnam ended. Back in the world, Carter had nothing to keep him occupied and an extremely dangerous skill set to put to use. So, he started a business. Carter considered himself a freelance secret agent. He solved problems for people. Industrial espionage, political snooping, strike-breaking, leg-breaking, blackmail, even the occasional wet job. He wasn't particular, as long as the work kept him busy. Undercover gigs were always his favorite, however. He'd spent 4 months raising hell within Boston's Irish mob until he got caught up in a police sting. That was how he ended up on Senator Boulder's radar. Strange things were afoot at the Metropolitan, and the senator needed a man on the inside. Carter closed his eyes. Boulder had received an anonymous letter from someone at the Metropolitan claiming unusual deaths and disappearances at the hospital. The senator's investigation turned up 2 overdoses, 4 suicides, and 3 accidents in less than 24 months. They did good work, but none of them could figure out what happened to Ann Davis. Carter walked himself through the information again, mentally retracing Ann's last known movements. Ann was a shy, homely girl, sickly thin with flat, straight hair, the color of fryer grease, and a nose too small for the freckles that sprawled across it. She'd never been popular, and occupied her time playing with matches. That's what landed her in the Metropolitan. Even there, she hadn't made many friends. The Jenga games were just gaining traction, or maybe she would have been playing that during the Christmas party. Instead, she went out to the fuck tent to unwrap someone's package. According to her sister, Ann had never dated in school or even attended a party or dance. It was likely the first time anyone had shown an interest in her. So, of course, she went with them. It took Carter 2 weeks of careful prodding to get that information without setting off alarms. The only problem was, nobody knew who she'd gone with, only what had happened next. He'd gotten that part from Richard DePaul. There'd been a foot of snow on the ground, but Ann had never been to the tent before. That was a special occasion for the peeper. So he had diligently braved the elements to catch her debut performance. Richie's recounting of the events was extremely detailed, right down to the grip he'd been using on himself when the camera flashed. It took him a moment to understand that that is what it had been, until there was another. After the third, Ann started shouting at whoever she was with to stop and give her the pictures. That meant it had been an instant camera. Someone at the hospital had taken Polaroids of Ann, and Carter was sure he'd find them on campus. The photographer did not stop. More snapshots followed, lighting up the tent and drawing desperate cries from Ann. She fumbled out of the tent a moment later, stark nude and blind with tears. She ran through the snow until she tripped and disappeared from sight. That's when Richie panicked and ran inside to get Johnny Washington. The orderly called the guardhouse. The weather had been frightful, and so had the incompetents. Carter had been at the asylum all of a day when he dug one of her fingernails out of the fountain's mortar. He was sure it was hers from the last few chips of polish that hadn't worn off. She always painted them the same dull shade of pink, according to her sister. Carter opened his eyes and looked over his shoulder at the dead grass where the fuck tent had been. Ann Davis had run in a nearly straight line, and yet the staff couldn't find her. But someone had. "Hey, Carter," the shaky voice said. "Ed says it's almost time for your next match." Carter stared past the messenger at the security stooges unpacking a new tent. "Didn't waste any time getting us a replacement." "Hey man, why should the turkey be the only thing getting stuffed around here?" A couple hours later, Carter was up an entire pack of mixed smokes, 2 expired Quaaludes, a Hustler, half a Baby Ruth, and 4 Twinkies. It wasn't a bad haul, and he was sitting in the finals to be played the next day, before Thanksgiving dinner. The other half of the bracket would be decided in the morning, in order to determine his challenger. Carter scanned the board and ran the odds for each. He was sure he'd be facing Melvin Watts, based on the pairings. Melvin played Jenga like he was Sun Tzu reincarnated. His matches would take time, and Carter could slip away to check the dead drop before Boulder's agents took off for Thanksgiving. The civil servants weren't about to pass on a paid holiday. He thought about what their last note had said as he went to stash his winnings. New letter arrived. Ann Davis dead. Basement. File box 304 AF. Confirm finding. Be careful. Exfil Monday. The information sat sourly in Carter's stomach. Either this new letter was from a different author, or someone was fucking with him. Carter laid down on his mattress and stared at the 10 glow-in-the-dark stars a previous occupant had glued to the ceiling. In Vietnam, they'd learned to sleep whenever they could. The enemy was everywhere, watching over his long-range patrol like monsters in closets. But sleep was a requirement. He could hear the Kong in the bush, sharpening bayonets and setting traps. It became a twisted lullaby, night after night. Carter rolled onto his side and let the familiarity of certain death swaddle him as he drifted off. He was going to have a busy night, and he needed a few hours to recharge. Carter awoke a little more than 4 hours later. Thanks to his condition, he needed very little sleep. He peeked into the hallways. They were deserted, but he could hear Johnny's stereo coming from the rec room. Carter checked the time to be sure, then cursed. Johnny was running behind schedule. He didn't want to hurt the orderly, but he needed to cross the rec room in order to access the basement. He tiptoed along the linoleum until he could see Johnny. The man danced along with the music, moonwalking with a plastic chair before gracefully stacking it onto a table. Carter watched his entire Michael Jackson routine until the song ended, and Johnny struck the MJ pose with a tee-hee for good measure. Carter smiled malevolently. The VC had used a lot of sneaky tricks during the war. He'd seen guys impaled on punji stakes and blown apart by landmines, but a good soldier could spot a tripwire. Gonorrhea, on the other hand, wouldn't start showing symptoms for 2 or 3 days. His long-range reconnaissance patrol would be in the bush for weeks, and half the team would be pissing razors and bleeding from the ass. The most dangerous weapon in war were your own soldiers with free time and blue balls. He backtracked down the hall and quickly jimmied the cheap lock to access the room. He crept to the bunk and placed his hand over the open mouth of the sleeping patient so she didn't wake her roommate. Shelley's eyes snapped open and she started to bolt upright when she realized it was Carter holding her down. She licked his palm and quickly caught him by the wrist when he recoiled. The octogenarian sucked Carter's index finger with noisy slurps. She gummed the tip and moaned. "Keep quiet," Carter whispered. "Don't worry about Doris. Her hearing aids are out," Shelley purred. "Come to return my teeth?" Something like that. Johnny is having a rough go after what happened to Jenny last night. That's a shame. Did you know I don't have a gag reflex? Shelley swallowed Carter's finger again until it tickled her uvula. I do. Carter jerked his finger free with a wet pop. I need you to do me a favor. I'm trying. Okay, I need you to do that favor, but do it to Johnny. Carter produced the dentures. I'm cashing in on his behalf. He's in the rec room. I can't do that in there. That would be lewd. That's right, it would be. Carter helped her sit up. That's why you're going to do it in Horn's office. Wouldn't be the first time someone's gotten sucked off in there. Shelley's toothless smile stretched wider. But it will be the first time someone's enjoyed it this much. Carter stood guard at the door while Shelley fixed her hair, top and bottom. 10 minutes later, he was watching her drooping bare ass strut into the recreation room. Carter followed a safe distance behind, but lost sight of her as she rounded the corner. Even with the music playing, he could hear Johnny's shocked squeal. Carter edged to the corner and chanced a glance into the room. Shelley was twisting her nipples like she was tuning a television set as she backpedaled into Horn's office. Johnny followed her to the door, trying to coax her out. Carter moved low and fast, ducking behind the cleaning cart. You need to come out of there or I'm going to call the nurses, Johnny said. If they come down here, you're going to get the shot. That's not the prick I'm looking for. She sang it like a nursery rhyme. Are you going to come in here and come in here? Carter could imagine what had happened by Johnny's very loud gag. It was time to move. He sprang from cover and dived into a roll that carried him the rest of the way. He hoped Johnny would forgive him for the trauma, but there was work to be done. Many of the hospital's non-essential doors had never been updated with modern locks. Carter had filed a copy of the century-old key from a bolt he'd pulled out of his own bed frame. It wasn't an exact match, but it was close enough. Carter braced himself for the squeak, but the door opened smoothly. He glared at the hinges. The first week after he got sent to the hospital, he'd made it a point to check the basement and old death tunnel. The door had been loud as hell that night. Someone else had been sneaking into the basement. Carter moved down the stairs cautiously. Nothing really prepares you for falling down a dark staircase, though. By the time he reached the bottom, his eyes had adjusted enough to see the ambient light coming in through the basement's dingy windows. Carter's nose twitched from stirring dust and mold in the air. He pinched the bridge to hold back the sneeze. The basement was a labyrinth of unsteady shelving laden with filing boxes stuffed with patient records. Most of them were water-damaged or chewed up by rats. Peter Lansky had done all the typing for the last 16 years. He'd worked as a stenographer before having a mental breakdown and amputating one of his legs to force-feed his overbearing mother. Carter wondered how many boxes Pete had filled since his culinary aspirations went down the drain. He could hear the rodents rustling amongst the pages. Anne had been missing almost a year, and there was a good chance whatever evidence was contained in box 304AF had already been shredded by the vermin. Carter flicked his lighter and scanned the nearest labels. They appeared to be the oldest. He continued deeper into the half-assed aisles and repeated the process several more times, trying to find order to the dates. After nearly an hour of wandering the rows, he discovered the start of Pete's system. It made as much sense as one could expect from a nuthouse secretary, but it was better than nothing. Carter grabbed a random box and jerked it from the shelf to the stone floor. The rats had taken inspiration from the patients and built their own version of the fuck tent inside. One scurried up Carter's arm to express its displeasure with the cock-blocking human. Carter shook it off and pulled out several pages, twisting them into a tube. The old paper ignited easily with a touch from his bic, giving him ample light to find the correct box. He dropped the makeshift torch beside him. The pages unfurled and the flames spread across them, spilling a tidy pool of light for him to see by. Carter gave the box a shake and listened for disgruntled rats before he popped off the top. He grimaced as he lifted the Polaroid. Anne looked shocked at the photographer's betrayal as she tried to cover herself with her skinny, freckled arms. He dropped the photo onto the burning pages, watching the film bubble up. He looked back into the box and pulled out a single, typed page. "You got to see her. Now I see you. You're dead, snitch." Carter looked around the room, expecting someone to come rushing at him from the shadows. Instead, he saw a tiny, blinking light in the corner. He stood, grinding the flames out under his slipper. He waved at the security camera. "And now I see you too, dickweed." Carter paused outside the security room. Whoever was inside would be expecting him, but they didn't know what to expect from him. They wouldn't have been playing games if they did. He mule-kicked the door and, when no one opened fire, he stepped inside. "You should have shot me." He fished the pack of assorted cigarettes from his pocket. "Care for one? Got menthol and regular." "It's a filthy habit," Grant said, turning his chair away from the bank of camera monitors to face him. "You a cop?" Carter lit a cigarette with a bemused grunt. "You wish." "So what then? You just nosy?" Grant shrugged and rose from the chair. "A concerned citizen?" "I'm just here for the free pajamas. Slippers are pretty comfortable too." "Too bad you're not a cop." Grant slid the long flashlight from his belt. Too bad for you, that is. A cop falling down the stairs would be hard to explain. Some random nut, that's a different story. One you've told a lot, I'm guessing. Carter took a deep pull from the cigarette. That what happened to Anne? You make her fall down some stairs after your little photo shoot? Didn't have nothing to do with that. Grant switched on the mag light and made a rudimentary shadow puppet of walking legs. Little firebug ran away. Maybe she went to one of the homeless camps. Maybe she died from exposure. Either way, we never saw her again. Were you the one with her in the tent? Wrong again. The guard moved the light to Carter's face. You saw the pictures. Her freckles were bigger than her tits. That's not the kind of lay you go out in a snowstorm for. My turn to ask a question. Go for it. The senator send you here, or the bitch's sister? One and then the other, Carter admitted. The senator wanted proof you dipshits were up to no good. Checked all those boxes, so mission accomplished. The sister wanted me to find out what happened to Anne. I'm still working on that one, but you're about to tell me. Already did. Grant aimed the light at the window. She took off. Probably jumped the north wall where the oak used to reach over. We chopped them all down after that just to keep any others from doing it too. Man, we looked everywhere too. Don't think we didn't. We got a good thing going for us here. Free drugs, plenty of pussy, a steady paycheck. Some naked escapee turning up in town would have fucked that all up. We searched for hours and went through the woods soon as it was light out. If she made it to the main road, hell, who knows? Some truck driver might have picked her up. Probably working a truck stop glory hole in Pennsylvania by now. If you didn't take the pictures, then how'd you get them? Grant looked visibly uncomfortable at that one. Not the look of someone caught with his hand in the cookie jar. It was the look of someone holding another person's dirty laundry. Carter nodded to himself. Grant was dumb, but big. No one was going to bully him into being their muscle. It had to be someone with the money to afford him, or the brains to manipulate him. Whichever the case, it still only left one option. I think it's time to get on with your accident, Grant said, patting the light against his palm. Carter flicked his cigarette at the guard, buying him enough time to cover the space between them. The flashlight swooshed overhead as Carter dropped low and bobbed up to deliver a two-punch combination that sent his opponent staggering. Grant took a desperate backhand swing with the light that Carter intercepted with ease. He redirected the bigger man's momentum. The window shattered, and Carter watched the spit-polished shoes going over the sill. A pair of panicked screams came from below. Carter took a cautious peek outside. Grant's body laid in the middle of the newly erected tent, with one of its poles protruding from his neck. The occupants were struggling to free themselves from the nylon entrapment. Guess it's a threesome now. After dumping Grant out the window, Carter destroyed the security tapes and returned to his room expecting an emergency head count. That never happened. He used the time to meditate on the facts. He knew who had taken the pictures that night, but that left another problem. Big Jenny. The guard had said Anne wasn't the type of girl you go into a blizzard to have sex with. As he paced the room waiting for the police to show up, he'd realized that Grant had a point. Anne was scrawny, barely in her 20s, and mousy. She was the exact opposite of Jenny in every way. They wouldn't have attracted the same lover, but they might have attracted the same killer. The senator's people had only looked at the last 2 years for strange deaths and disappearances amongst the patients. Carter wondered what they'd find if they looked back further. He went to the window and checked his watch. Dr. Chambers had shown up an hour after Carter killed Grant, but there still weren't any police. Either they had the worst response time in the country, or Grant had been disposed of simply as the bloody tent. Carter didn't like that. That meant Chambers had covered up at least 2 murders to keep his own ass out of the sling. He wondered how many employees had suddenly stopped coming to work over the years, and felt his stomach tighten. It was the same feeling he got right before an ambush. Someone had turned the Metropolitan into a hunting ground. He lit a cigarette and put his slippers on with a happy groan. They really were comfortable. It had been almost 5 hours, and the doctor's car was still out front. He padded out of his room and carefully navigated the halls of the East Wing. If Johnny had escaped Shelley, he'd be finishing up his 5 o'clock rounds before the morning nurses arrived. Chambers' office was in the central annex, which meant Carter would have to exit through the lobby to get back to his room. He checked his watch and sputtered his lips. He was going to be cutting it close. He detoured slightly to peek in at the security room. His instincts were correct. Someone had tidied up, and the rest of Anne's photos were spread out on the desk, illuminated by the black and white monitors. A fresh page hung from the typewriter, sitting next to a half bottle of Jim Beam. The paper flapped in the cold fall breeze coming in through the broken window. Carter didn't need to read it to know it was a suicide note. He stepped into the room and took a swig from the bottle before pouring it over the photos and striking his lighter to them. He watched the scared, embarrassed face of Anne disappear as one of the photos crinkled into a ball. If it hadn't been for Chambers, Anne never would have run off that night. She'd still be alive. Carter tried to remember the last Thanksgiving he'd spent with his family. His mom always got up before dawn. That could be Anne, waking up right about then to help her sister get the turkey started, instead of being nothing but a dozen burning Polaroids on a nuthouse desk. Carter watched the flames consume the images until he was sure no one could salvage them. It was enough that she'd been murdered. No one needed to know she'd been humiliated first. Carter would settle that account himself. He backtracked to the stairwell and took the steps 2 at a time. The remaining guards would be looking for an escaped patient. They'd assume Chambers was safe if he stuck to the office, so Carter felt comfortable making some noise to get there quicker. He'd never been to the 3rd floor, but he was sure it wasn't supposed to look the way it did. He froze on the final step and listened for a full minute before advancing. A dark puddle of blood was drying on the teak floor. There were handprints on the wall where someone had braced themselves as they limped away. It didn't look like they'd made it wherever they were going. Carter paused next to a partially open door and bumped it open with his toe. One of the guards sat cross-legged in the floor with feathers from a duster stapled to his balding head. Blood had been smeared on his face like war paint, and his torso had been hacked up. 2 severed heads sat on the floor in front of him, wearing paper pilgrim hats like Nurse Horn had made with all the patients earlier in the week. Carter thought they were the other night guards, but he remembered them being taller. "Well, that's certainly festive," he whispered, before continuing on. The doctor's door was wide open. Carter looked around for a weapon. Aside from an antique desk and a potted ficus, the hall was barren. He cursed silently and stepped into the office. The sight left him sickened, but also strangely impressed by the creativity. A rib cage laid on one end of the desk, with an arm shoved through the neck. Organs, fingers, and fruit from the cafeteria had been arranged carefully inside, while the intestines had been delicately spread around, like garnish, framing the serving platter that held Chambers' head. The psychiatrist was turned into a macabre parody of the Thanksgiving cornucopia. Carter scanned the room for remaining body parts, but came up with nothing. "Saving them to make a nativity for Christmas," he said, as he quickly rummaged through the drawers. He lifted a manila envelope and held it close to the lamp. Carter flipped through the dossier for someone named Marvin Waltz. He didn't recognize the name, but there was a mugshot dated 1951. There was something familiar about the face. He was only 17, with big eyes, high cheekbones, and a narrow chin that made Carter think of wasps. His dark hair was worn in a high, stylish pompadour. Carter skimmed the pages for clues. Marvin had been arrested for kidnapping 2 brothers, ages 9 and 11. He'd kept them almost a week before bashing their heads in with a hammer. One of them hadn't survived the ordeal, but the other had been able to crawl for help. There was a picture of the boys. The older one had a splash of large freckles that covered most of his face and stringy long hair, almost to his shoulders. With her slight build, Ann Davis hadn't looked much different than the child. Carter stared at the mugshot again. The man would be around 60 now, but the eyes never really change, at least not what's inside them. That's what Carter recognized. He'd definitely seen the man before, but Marvin was incarcerated in a federal sanatorium several counties away. He closed the file, and his eyes drifted over the handwritten name on the folder's tab. He reached over Chambers' disembodied spleen to retrieve a fountain pen and proceeded to edit 3 of the letters. "Got you now, you bastard." Carter bolted from the office. He was running out of time, and he needed to make a stop before confronting his quarry. The rec room lights were on by the time Carter arrived. He leaned on the wall to catch his breath. The run down the stairs and then all the way across the hospital had kicked his ass. He decided quitting smoking was going to be his New Year's resolution. He used the pit stop to take in the room's holiday makeover. The patients that could be trusted with scissors had been making construction paper turkeys all week that were then carefully glued together to make garland strands. Others had painted miniature pumpkins that now sat festively on the tables. It had been Nurse Horn's idea to keep everyone busy. She must have come in early and put the decorations out. Carter didn't know if Johnny and Shelley had helped or simply been caught fornicating in the office, but all three of them were bound to the plastic chairs around the centermost table, with Melvin Watts and a stacked Jenga tower. No one liked Melvin, and Carter understood why. Aside from playing dirty Jenga, he looked like someone put a toupee on a skeleton, and if he ever blinked, then Carter hadn't seen it. That's why the eyes were so familiar to him. Canned cranberry sauce had been plopped out onto paper plates for the three reluctant guests. Carter joined them at the table, keeping the file folder in his lap as he sat down. "Finals aren't until this afternoon," he said. "Figured we'd skip the epic showdown," Melvin told him. "Too bad we don't have time." Carter nodded to the wall clock someone had put a paper pumpkin frame around. "Staff shows up in 20 minutes. I can beat you in 10. Melvin sat a bent composition notebook on the table. Carter saw "Property of Ann Davis" scrawled on the front in pink ink. He'd been given a similar one when he arrived. Chambers thought journaling might help the patients gather their thoughts for sessions. It wasn't enough that she'd been humiliated and murdered, but the son of a bitch had gone so far as to read her diary as well. Carter set the folder on the table, overlapping Ann's journal with the edited name where the nurse could read it. "I'll see your bet and raise Marvin," Carter said. "The Metropolitan doesn't take violent criminals, especially not child killers. 3 little pen pokes was all it took for you to trade places with the real Melvin Watts." "I can't believe it took so long for someone to figure it out," the killer said. "I gave it a week tops before they realized what happened. I actually planned on it even. But no one cares about the mentally ill. Melvin or Marvin, it doesn't matter. Just another nut in the same shell." So they all went about their days, thinking I was the half-wit and not paying one damn bit of attention to me. "Then you saw Ann," Carter added. "She looked like the boy that got away. At least enough for a degenerate dickhead like you." "We should begin." Marvin picked an easy block and pulled it from the tower, tapping on his hatchet for luck before adding it to the top. "By the way, we're playing for keepsies. They sent you to stop me, and that's not something one lets slide." "Actually, they sent me for Chambers." Carter pulled a block with little thought to the move. "Speaking of which, the therapy obviously hasn't been working for you." "I have my own sort of therapy." Marvin danced his fingers on the axe. "I used to climb the wall where the oak tree stretched over. I'd take this hatchet with me. As far as alibis go, being committed to an asylum is tighter than a duck's asshole." "Didn't know you were into veterinary proctology." Carter tapped a cigarette from his pack. "It's your turn." Marvin studied the stack, carefully probing a precarious block. Carter made sure to direct the smoke straight at him. Marvin coughed slightly and pushed the block through, giving it a little twist to disrupt the adjacent pieces. Carter snickered at the dirty move. "They cut down the branches after Ann disappeared," he said. "No more nights out for you, Marv." Ironically, I was the one tasked with removal. He leaned over and took a bite from Horn's plate of cranberry sauce, slurping it loudly from the plastic spoon. The real Melvin loved landscaping, so Chambers let me have the job here. I took down those branches with Ann's blood still on the blade. What did you do with her? Carter pulled from the bottom of the stack, and the tower wobbled from the fast jerk. He put it on top with the same nonchalance. I buried some. The ground was frozen and I got tired after 3 or 4 holes. Marvin lifted a small jewelry box from the floor. Then I remembered the incinerator and dumped the rest in it. Well, most of the rest. I raise. Carter tossed the rest of the smokes onto the documents. I'm all in. Marvin opened the jewelry box. The box was hers too, and so were these. Marvin took a small satin pouch from the box and turned it upside down. 7 teeth slid down the manila folder and onto the table. Dried blood stained the broken roots where they'd been smashed from the young woman's mouth. Carter couldn't feel stress or fear, but anger was something else. He turned to Johnny and Shelley, then to Nurse Horn. You killed Jenny because you can't get out anymore, he said. The pressure got to be too much, and you needed to let it off. But that means Chambers didn't have time to uncover your real identity. He already knew. If only you put that much thought into your moves, you might actually win a game. Marvin took another piece from the tower. Chambers built the first tent himself. He's been taking his little pictures for years. He liked taking pictures. Sometimes he came with me when I went out at night, so he could take more. And now you're cleaning house, Carter added. That's why these 3 aren't dead. If they weren't here, I'd come over the table and split your fucking wishbone. But you can get to Johnny before I can get to you. You need to kill me in self-defense. Photos of your victims will be found with Chambers' belongings, and everyone will think I took my job too far and killed everyone else to cover it up. The senator shuts this dump down and you move to a new, lax facility that you can escape from easily. At least, that's how I would do it. Something along those lines. Marvin stirred the teeth with the wooden game piece and tapped one closer to Carter before placing it. The tower wobbled slightly. It's your move now. Yeah, I suppose it is. Carter snuffed his cigarette in a slice of cranberry and sputtered his lips. I always preferred Scrabble. My old man loved that game. The week before I went to Nam, the first time, we played. He died before I got back, so maybe that's why I always remember it. You're stalling. Not at all. The story is just apropos. Carter leaned back in his chair. The tile bag was not being friendly to him. He kept getting vowels and crappy letters like J and X. He was desperately trying to put anything on the board, but I was up more than 40 points and had 2 tiles left. Easy pickings. He had 5 tiles left, including that goddamn X. And then he plays right off my last move, uses every one of them, and finishes on a triple word score. 81 points. Just like that. The word was asphyxia. The lamp cord cinched into Marvin's flesh before he could comprehend what was happening. Not only were the slippers damn comfortable, but they were quiet too. Richie jerked hard, flipping Marvin's chair over, and dragged the man across the floor. Carter calmly took a piece from the tower and stacked it. Hey, Marv, it's your turn. He turned to the nurse. I guess he's busy. Do you want to play for him? Nurse Horn mumble-screamed through her gag. Marvin couldn't be sure, but it sounded a lot like, "Get me the fuck out of here." Marvin's legs were flailing wildly while Richie avenged Big Jenny. Aside from axe murdering his family that one time, Richie wasn't a killer. His form was all wrong, and he left himself too little slack in the improvised garrote. It created more tension, but required a lot more energy to keep it on. Carter saw what was coming. He grabbed the hatchet and cut Johnny loose. "Get them out of here," he snapped, before charging at Marvin. It was too late. Richie's arms were tiring and he was wheezing with exertion. Marvin twisted around, kicking the compulsive masturbator square in his horn o'plenty. He used the cord to pull Richie into Carter's path, sending all three of them toppling to the floor. The hatchet spun across the linoleum. Marvin went for it. Carter caught the cord still looped around his throat and pulled him back. "Sorry to be a pain in the neck," he said, trying to regain his footing. "But we're still playing here." "And it's my turn," Marvin growled, launching himself from the floor. They crashed through the table. Game pieces and tiny pumpkins scattered across the floor. Marvin's fingers clawed at Carter's face, tearing trenches through the skin. Carter took a wild swing that narrowly missed, and Marvin returned fire with primal clubbing blows from both hands. Richie grabbed the killer's shirt and tried to pull him off. Marvin twisted and bit Richie's hand. "Hey! Gourd night, asshole!" Carter swung one of the tiny pumpkins up, driving the stem into Marvin's eye. The killer rolled away, howling. Carter didn't waste time. He clambered to his feet and kicked Marvin in the ribs until he heard bones break, then gave him two more for good measure. The others were gathered around Richie. Carter went to the wrecked table and collected Anne's teeth into the jewelry box and shook Cranberry from her diary. He kicked blocks at Marvin. "It really was your turn, Marv. I win." He went to Horn and handed her Anne's belongings. He started to speak when he heard the killer snarling. Marvin had managed back to his feet by the time Carter turned around. He ripped the pumpkin free with a hot, crimson spurt that turned into a trickle down his sunken cheek. Marvin's fingers curled into claws as he charged forward. Carter widened his stance and twisted his toes into the floor. His hand drew back to deliver a killing blow to the man's throat. Marvin screamed animalistically as he drew nearer when his foot slipped on one of the spilled plates. He crashed to the floor and sat up with a shriek. The hatchet came down, splitting his skull all the way to his nose. The killer dropped back, pulling the weapon from Johnny's shaking hand. Marvin's tongue twitched and danced beneath the blade, lapping up his own dripping brain matter. "Well, shit," Carter relaxed. "I didn't get to kill either of the bastards I came here for." "What now?" Johnny asked. "Now? We call the police, Johnny. That's what we do now," Horn shouted before melting to the floor. "And while we wait, we can all say what we're thankful for," Carter added. "It is the day for that, after all." "I'm thankful for garden tools," Johnny said, ripping the axe from Marvin's face. "I'd be thankful for an ice pack for my nuts," Richie whined. "I got something else you can put on them," Shelley said with a wink that lingered on a full-blown nap. "Well, unfortunately, the fuck tent was destroyed when Grant jumped to his death," Carter corrected himself. "And me, I'm thankful the cranberry sauce was ruined. I hate that stuff." "What the fuck happened here?" Ed screamed from the hallway with 24 patients behind him. The survivors all exchanged glances before silently agreeing on who to saddle with the responsibility of an explanation, and turning their eyes to Carter. He sighed and tossed his hands into the air. Happy Thanksgiving! And that is our holiday helping for tonight. I hope you have enough for leftovers. Now, my spookies, I hope your turkey is tender, your pie is plentiful, and your house free of mysterious footprints in the snow. And if you're traveling, keep the radio low and the doors locked. If you're hosting, maybe count the place settings twice, just in case. And now for dessert, this Black Friday, on Cutting Deep into Horror, we're carving into the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974, the quintessential pass the carving knife cautionary tale. We'll talk the grit, gristle, and why it's the perfect Thanksgiving time watch, especially after your third plate of stuffing, because it's all about family and food in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That's this Friday, so make sure you're subscribed. Saturday, we're releasing our first 10-story Christmas horror compilation for you to enjoy, and on Monday, we head to the Victorian era to unveil some of the most terrifying, deadly elements of a Victorian Christmas. And I want to say a huge thank you to our Patreon podcast boosters, folks who pay just a little bit more, to hear their names at the end of the show. And they are Johnny Nix, Kate and Lulu, Jessica Fuller, Mike Eschewy, Jenny Green, Amber Hansford, Karen Weemet, Jack Kerr, and Craig Cohen. If you want to hear your name on the show, head to weeklyspooky.com/join for as little as $1 a month. You get 2 bonus shows every single month, 5 years of creepypasta readings and audiobooks. And if you contribute $15 a month or higher, you'll hear your name at the end of the show just like those folks I read very quickly, because I've got so much to do before I put the bird in the oven. So for myself, for my executive producers, Rob Fields and Bobbletopia.com, my creepy composer, Ray Mattis, and of course, my producer, Dan Wilder, I'll be talking at you, very soon after this turkey coma.
Thank you for listening. Make sure to find your way back next week. But for now, you are safe. Trust me.